Well, hi, everybody. This is Diane Billings, and we're going to go ahead and get started with our session today. I'm really happy to welcome you. We have Terry Valiga. I'm going to introduce her in a minute with an exciting session about building the science of nursing education. And looks like everybody's pretty much logged in. Be sure that if you can connect with your telephone with your name, that helps us to know that you're connected. And just to remind you that we're going to have everybody's lines muted. They're muted now. And you can raise your hand there, with the raise your hand symbol. I think everybody remembers where that is, down there in the lower left. And I'll try to pay attention to that, and we'll call on you. And then to speak, you'll have to unmute yourself using the *6. So that's how we'll kind of communicate. And let's see, what else do I need to say? Well, while Tanya's passing the ball over to Dr. Valiga, let me introduce her. And Terry and I have been colleagues and friends for a long time. We started, I think my first recollection of meeting Terry was at an NLN research conference where she was doing a lot of interesting work and presenting to that session. And then she has also taught at Seton Hall, so those of you from Seton, you have connections with Terry. And Terry's been a dean, and then previous to her current position, she was at the National League for Nursing, where she, I'll attribute all of the gains in the National League for Nursing to Terry Valiga and Mary Ann Mithelo, for really helping us focus on faculty development and building the science of nursing education. So, she's had a fabulous career, and now she's a professor and director for the Institute for Educational Excellence at Duke University. And there's several schools, and more and more now are developing institutes like this that are helping schools of nursing to focus on educational excellence, build the science, and build a cadre of faculty who are really focused on doing excellence in teaching. So that's Terry's background, and I think probably what we could do is just let me stop talking and have Terry take it from here. So I don't see that Terry has, Terry, now you have the slides. Do you?
I do. The ball is coming over to me, apparently.
Okay, so you should be able to advance them now.
Okay, great. Thank you, Diane, for the introduction, and indeed, we do go back quite a ways, and, it's been a relatively small community of people who have really lived the passion and the commitment, I think, to advance educational research and really to advance the visibility and the valuing of teaching. It's been under an assumption, I think, at least in higher ed, because people who want to teach in primary and secondary schools have to be prepared as a teacher. But in higher ed, somehow we have this notion that, if you're doctorally prepared or master's prepared and you know your field, well, then you could teach it. But we're finding that that's not the case. And increasingly, we're seeing reports about students are graduating from college not very different from when they went in, or with skills, they don't have the skills that they need to function in the world. So higher ed's coming under a good deal of fire, and there's increasing recognition of, there is something that you need to know to be a good teacher. And there is a research base on which to base your teaching practices, just like there is a base for your clinical practices. So I find it incredibly affirming that more people than just a handful of us are starting to talk about this. So it's a delight to have this opportunity to be with you. It dawned on me that this is a Friday afternoon, and I thought, oh my gosh, talk about building a science on a Friday afternoon. That may not be the thing that most people really want to do. But I'm glad that you're here. I'm glad I have the chance to chat. And what I'll try to do about every 15 minutes or so is kind of stop and see if there's any questions. So as we're going through, be thinking of any questions you might have or comments you might want to make or challenges you might want to pose. And then, raise your hand for that, and Diane will kind of facilitate that whole process. And so we'll have an opportunity to have some exchange and then carry on with the material. So our topic is focused on building the science of nursing education. And, okay, now I apparently have the ball, and I'm trying to move the slides. There they go.
There you go. Yeah.
So we're going to focus on just what a science is and how it develops. And those of you in some of your master's programs, and I would imagine certainly in your doctoral programs, you've probably spent a lot of time talking about this. So I would welcome any input from you. And then we'll talk about the science of nursing education and what we need to be thinking about as that goes forward to be developed. Who are the people that are developing that science? Well, it's the scholars, and we're engaging in scholarship in a number of different kinds of ways, and we'll talk about that. And then we'll look to draw some links between the science of nursing education and evidence-based teaching practices, excellence, and what we do, or perhaps might want to think about stop doing as educators. So if we think about a science, a science is really quite focused. Now, that doesn't mean it's necessarily very narrow and only deals with one phenomenon, but there is clearly an area of study or concern, and we're talking about then this science of nursing education. So it's all the components of nursing education, which of course would get into who are the faculty and what do they do? Who are the students and what do they do? Who are our clinical partners and how are they involved in our educational programs? What's the learning environment in terms of a physical environment, a virtual environment, tools, and so on and so forth? So there's a lot of dimensions to that focus. A science is created systematically, which means we need to be thinking deliberately about the questions that we raise, the areas that we study, and build from one level of thinking to another, and we do that in a systematic rather than a haphazard kind of way. We'll talk a little bit more about this later when we talk about inclusive science, but we need a variety of methods, whether those are our typical and familiar quantitative methods or other kinds of ways that we will come to know what we need to know. And we test as we are beginning to draw conclusions or make linkages and propositions, we need to test that through a variety of techniques. And then the outcome of all of it ought to be results that have some use and some value. So all of those are characteristics of a science that as we move forward developing a science of nursing, we need to keep in mind. And how does a science develop? Well, in the early 60s, Thomas Kuhn wrote a book about revolutions, and I don't mean like political revolutions, although that's kind of what the photo is, but there might be, in a particular area or field, there might be some overnight understanding about something, and that often happens in the sciences, that physicists or mathematicians will go on for decades thinking one kind of thing, and then there's some kind of aha phenomenon that turns things upside down. I think when I think about nursing education, and this isn't necessarily the science, but I think there's been great hope that the Carnegie Foundation study that came out in 2010 about transforming nursing education would be a way to help us revolutionize what we do in nursing, how we do it, and the questions that we ask about studying. There's all kinds of reasons why, and we'll talk about some of these, why we don't necessarily embrace change in a revolutionary way in the educational academic environment. But that kind of new thinking that gets put out before us can really help us be raising different kinds of questions. But most often science develops in an evolutionary kind of a way where it happens slowly, it happens over time, we develop increasing skills, we ask better and better kinds of questions, our methods of study and analysis become more sophisticated, and that's probably where we're going in terms of nursing ed. And who develops the science? Well, it's scholars. And that doesn't mean it's somebody with a particular credential or who has a certain number of dollars from NIH, but we're going to talk about scholars and who they are and why we need them. And we do need scholars because what scholars produce and the questions they help us ask give us some opportunity to speak with authorities so that if you are trying to advance a proposal or an idea about how we might put a curriculum together, to be able to draw on the work of a variety of scholars and good thinkers as part of your argument is likely to have a little more impact than you sitting there saying, well, I think this is a good idea. So they influence the way we think and practice. I think one of the great things about scholars and people who are contributing in that kind of way is that they're opening us up to think about the world around us and what we do in new ways, consider new perspectives and possibilities. And certainly all of that can lead to policy change, change in the way we do our practice, and so forth. There are many of us, I think, who would say that all nursing faculty need to think of themselves as scholars. Now, that does not mean everybody has to be a funded researcher, but think of yourselves as scholars. And I would challenge you to think about yourself. We here at Duke are engaged in a major curriculum overhaul. I managed to, I really didn't take it all on myself, but we made convincing cases that, you know what, it's time we stop looking at just one program. And let's not look just at the master's program, but let's look across the board. So we are looking at all four of our programs, baccalaureate, master's, DNP, and PhD. And identifying common themes that need to run through all of them, and what's the difference in what our expectations of what students will do regarding each of those themes. And it's really been a fabulous experience, and it's all of us thinking together in new kinds of ways. And one of the things that we do have a thread related to scholarship, and right from the baccalaureate level, our program outcome is that the students will act as evolving scholars, and then we describe some ways that they'll do that. But right from the beginning, I think we have to start helping our students think about themselves as scholars who ask questions, who look at things in new ways. And if we're going to ask the students to do that, we as faculty need to do that as well. But we can contribute to our science in very different ways. But just looking at characteristics of scholars, and you have all this in the handouts, but this notion of that you're always inquisitive and you have this sense of wonder about, gee, I wonder what would happen if. What if we put these students together with those students? What would happen if we started with severe illness? I mean, most of our curricula are wellness to illness, ho-hum. What if we started the students in an ICU? And really gave them that kind of an experience right from the beginning. Would we expect them to take responsibility for total patient care? I hope not. But maybe putting them in that kind of an environment would help them learn things in a different way that would be a good foundation for them to go forward. So scholars are kind of, they're passionate about some of these ideas. They're willing to let their imagination go and think creatively. But the other side of that, it's not just a flurry of here's an idea, there's another idea. But there's an element of being contemplative and thoughtful. And scholars are erudite and learned, meaning they are reading and listening to people and talking to people from a wide variety of fields. To draw only on nursing, I think, limits us enormously. And as scholars, we need to be paying attention to what people in other fields are saying and then begin to make connections of, well, how could we use that in nursing? What kind of value does that have for us? And we're always looking for understanding. And this says we seek in the truth. And, you know, it's not to suggest that there is one truth in this complex world. That's impossible. But that we're always trying to understand very deeply and get closer and closer to a really true understanding. Scholars are always challenging the status quo. They're not satisfied and won't accept mediocrity. They're challenging traditions, not to just throw out traditions because they're traditions, but to ask questions of, why are we doing this? Does this still make sense in 2012? Should we be thinking about this in a different way? And they engage in a discourse with other people and indeed within their own minds that really helps come to some new ideas. Certainly in all of this, you have to, I thought I heard a little something, sorry, that's why I was hesitating. You scholars will encourage both consent, they're looking for consensus, but they also will throw out ideas that they know are going to make people uncomfortable, and people might initially say, oh, that's a silly idea. So that dissent and helping people with different points of view engage in that discourse. And then, of course, another very real characteristic of scholars is that they're critical of themselves in an honest and helpful kind of a way, not that you beat yourself up. And they open themselves up to review and scrutiny by peers. And that is tied in with this notion of being honest and self-aware and of high character. And because what drives you is really wanting to get to a good understanding, and it's not to create the world a la Terry Valiga, it's to really help people have a deep understanding of what we're trying to do and what are some best ways to do that. And in that, you're taking risks. You're putting yourself on the line. You may publish things that you know are going to get people riled up and are going to likely to generate a lot of letters to the editor. I remember a couple of journal editors throughout my career who I just couldn't wait to read their next editorial because they said in writing the kinds of things that when you went to a conference, people would not get up to the microphone to say, but boy did they say it as they were walking out of the room. And these editors would publish these kinds of things. I think Leah Curtin is one person who continues to do that. So being brave and courageous is really a part of it, but there is also that sense of a humbleness that I'm not doing this for my own aggrandizement. I'm doing this really to move the field forward. So in the analysis of the literature, three key characteristics really come up for scholars. One is that they have integrity and they are people that you know are going to speak the truth and you can trust them. Perseverance certainly is another characteristic, that you're always curious. No matter where you are in your understanding, you're always pushing a little bit further about, well, what if we did this? I wonder what would happen if our students were put together in that kind of a way. And certainly that courage where, you kind of risk people saying you're a little bit crazy until the ideas can develop more. But this idea of character is really very important for a scholar, and as back as far as 1837, Ralph Waldo Emerson said, character is higher than intellect for a scholar. So it's more important that you are of good character, that people know you're not going to fudge data. You're not only going to report the things that align with what you hoped to find or a perspective that supports your point of view, but that you have character and you're going to put different kinds of perspectives out as well. So if we can kind of take a little break at this point, if anybody has any questions or comments, this would be a good time to raise those. So let me just pause for a little bit and see if anybody wants to raise any questions or make comments.
Okay, great. And this is Diane. I welcome everybody that's now joined, and this is your chance to make a comment or ask a question here. And I notice we have a few more of the faculty mentors and the PIs with us. So welcome to you all. And I think it looks like we have a good mix of our scholars, too. So anybody want to make a comment on this first part of Terry's session? Well, Terry, I'm not seeing anybody with anything burning at the moment, but we can, we'll always have time at the end for people to ask if something comes up. So I'll say continue on.
All righty, good. So we'll talk a little bit about what scholarship really is. And I think lots of times when we talk about scholarship, we tend to think about research and publications. But scholarship really is a much broader concept, and it really does have to do with some deliberate and in-depth and ongoing and systematic study so that we acquire knowledge and we better understand phenomena in our field. and that we make some effort to systematically advance that understanding, whether that's through our teaching or our dialogue with colleagues or presentations or whatever it is. Scholarship is also tied to this notion of curiosity, and quite a number of years ago, I read some article where a subtitle was "The Yen to Discover," and I just love that notion. It's just kind of always wanting to be drawn towards a newer understanding and that unrelenting inquisitiveness, and really exploring things that we don't know, either that are very unknown or are partially unknown. And when you think about nursing education, we think we've got it. We think we've been doing this for a long time, and our students are graduating and they're passing NCLEX and certification exams, and they're not killing too many patients once they get into practice. But is that really the only indicators of good quality in our students? Maybe passing the NCLEX, but are they really at a point of their development and their identity as nurses that we really want them to be and need them to be as they go into practice? So that inquisitiveness and always keeping your eyes open, I think, is expressed nicely by Serge. I don't know exactly how to pronounce his French name, but he was a philosopher. And he said, "How many experiences life offers us every day, but a deep thinker," and I would add a scholar, "gathers them up and makes his treasures of them." So as we look at the world around us, we're not just seeing things, we're processing, we're raising questions of, gosh, how can I'm watching them plant trees outside my office. What does that have to do with education? Are we as teachers kind of planting trees, or are we just planting beginning seeds that will grow into trees? And what do we need to do to nurture them to become the kind of full, vibrant tree that we hope they can be? So being sensitive to the world around us, or as we read things, not just put it from the pile of, I have to read this, to the pile of, I'm finished. But what did that reading that make me think about? What questions did it raise in my mind? What questions do I want to bring back to my colleagues? So I like this notion of, really paying attention to the world around us and make our treasures of how that can help us think better and do better at the work we do. So it's a conversation, essentially. It's a conversation with colleagues. It's a conversation with ideas. It's a conversation with ourselves in terms of processing and understanding. And it is that habit of inquiry. It's not something that you turn on when you go into your classroom and you turn it off when you leave the classroom. And I wonder how much that really happens. I look at faculty that I've known over the years, and I've taught in 6 different schools, and worked with literally hundreds of faculty in my work at the NLN. And, we talk to students about caring and starting from where the person is. Yet when we take on the persona of teacher, so often it's, this is what you need to do, I'm telling you this is what you need to do. It doesn't matter what you're coming in with. It doesn't matter what you really want to know. This is what we have to cover in this course. Thank you very much. That's what we need to do. These are the assignments, and that's all there is to it. So we espouse this philosophy of caring, but when it comes to implementing our role as teachers, sometimes we don't exhibit that same kind of caring that we will turn on when we go into a clinical practice site. So scholarship is the same way. It's not something that I turn on when I sit down to write an article and then turn it off again. It's a part of who we are. And C. Wright Mills, a sociologist, said that very well, I think. He said scholarship is the choice of how to live as well as a choice of career. So as we think about ourselves, do we exhibit those characteristics of scholars continually, no matter where we are? So let's take a look at different forms of scholarship and what that looks like. And I'm sure many of you are familiar with Ernest Boyer, who back in 1990 published this book, Scholarship Reconsidered, Priorities of the Professoriate. And he was with the Carnegie Commission at the time. And Boyer introduced us to the idea that we need a more inclusive view of what it means to be a scholar. And we need to recognize that knowledge is acquired through research or discovery, but it's also required through synthesis, through practice, and through teaching. So we'll take a quick look at each of these, and there's a lot written about Boyer. Some schools have adopted this model in their promotion and tenure criteria. Others kind of loosely connect to it, but don't necessarily commit to Boyer per se. And there have been subsequent works since 1990, some by Boyer and many by others. But just to lay a foundation, going back, if you will, to the original work, he talked about the scholarship of discovery, and that's what most of us are very familiar with. It's research, and most especially it's quantitative research, where randomized controlled trials are the gold standard. It's using the scientific method. It has to do with getting funding for your research and being successful in that competitive cycle. It's developing what we talk about as a program of research that one idea leads to another, And there's some, I don't know, I guess this is my perspective, that there's begrudging acceptance of things like qualitative and historical methods or theory development and testing or philosophical inquiry and analysis. Those certainly all are part of the scholarship of discovery, as Boyer talked about it. But in our traditional world, it's pretty much been quantitative research. And we evaluate that scholarship through publications in peer-reviewed journals and grants and fellowships. And largely, the thinking behind that is, if you put your work out to your peers and they think it's good enough to be published or good enough to be funded, then that is a kind of blessing of the fact that your work is valuable. So this notion of publishing in peer-reviewed journals and getting competitive grants really grows out of that notion that your peers are judging the value of your work. And then we get into impact factors, which is a way to measure, who else is using your work, how are they building on your work, and so forth. Where are you presenting your work, and so forth. So these are some ways that we use to evaluate the scholarship of discovery. And nurses certainly are engaged in this. And especially in terms of clinical practice, we're doing really good work here. But Boyer helped us think about that there's also other kinds of scholarship, and I think nurses are primed for any and all of these. There's a scholarship of integration where we're bringing ideas from seemingly disparate areas together and connecting them in new kinds of ways to either come up with new understandings, new products, new ways to go about delivering care. So rather than splitting knowledge into these little bits and pieces and staying in our silos, those engaged in the scholarship of integration are putting those facts into a larger perspective and trying to connect them and really working in an interdisciplinary kind of way. And again, just to be evaluated through publications and presentations, but it also might be evaluated through different kinds of projects and programs that are undertaken with an interdisciplinary team, grants that are received by an interdisciplinary team, patents. This might be, the faculty in the School of Nursing are wanting some way to track how their students are doing in terms of their understanding of the material, and wouldn't it be nice if we had some type of a database or a technology to help us do that? So you connect with faculty in the computer science department or the engineering department or whatever it happens to be. Or you might work with faculty in the psychology department in terms of trying to put some projects together that have to do with identity formation of nursing students. They understand the concept of identity formation from a psychology perspective, but you know what that's like in terms of taking on a nursing role and a nursing persona. So the scholarship of integration certainly has relevance for nursing, as does the scholarship of application. And this really does have to do with practice and using our knowledge to really address social problems and health-related problems that are complex and that need some depth of understanding, so that you're pulling together theory and practice in ways where they really renew one another. So how might this be evaluated? Well, you might end up developing through some quality improvement projects or whatever it happens to be, some innovative ways to have systems working or new communication patterns. You might indeed open your work to peers, publishing scholarly case studies about a particular patient or family situation. How does the work that you've done impact what other people do? If you develop a program in your institution about mentoring students who are at risk, do other schools pick up that project or that program or that system and kind of make it fit their own system? There might be patents that come out of this kind of thing. You might get awards as a master clinician or earning certification. Being involved in policy papers about practice or being invited to be on policy boards about practice issues. So again, there's a wide variety of ways to evaluate the scholarship of application. And the final one that Boyer talked about that probably has most relevance to what we're talking about today is the scholarship of teaching. And that has to do with developing innovative curricula that are shared for comment and critique. Making our teaching public, that is really one of the biggest pieces, I think, of the scholarship of teaching, that we are putting ourselves and our teaching practices out for public discussion, comment, critique, and think back, aren't those some of the characteristics we said of a scholar in general? So the questions that we pose, not so much about our clinical practice area, but the questions we pose about our students, our environments for learning, the relationships between students and teachers, team teaching versus isolated teaching, whatever it happens to be, posing those kinds of questions, suggesting new ways of thinking. All of that is really a part of the scholarship of teaching. And how do we evaluate that? Well, indeed, the same notion of rigorous peer review is applicable here, just like it is in the science of the scholarship of discovery. But here, what is reviewed is it might very well be a manuscript that you write, but it might also be your performance in the classroom or the clinical area when you're teaching there or in online. What do your syllabi look like? What kinds of course materials have you developed? What innovative assignments are you giving to students? Those are all things that could give a clue to the scholarship of teaching. What do your clinical agency colleagues say about how you are able to facilitate student learning in that environment and partnerships with those clinical staff so that the students have the best possible learning experience? The role that you take in leading curriculum innovations and creating innovative ways and environments in which students learn. Certainly grants for research or educational projects. Your role in shaping policy that has to do with education, that might be through a professional association like the NLN, developing hallmarks of excellence, or being on an accreditation board when you're developing accreditation standards. Those are all ways that you are bringing that kind of thinking and new perspectives on teaching and learning into a public arena for discussion. Certainly awards for being a master teacher, just like a master clinician in the scholarship of application, might be recognized. The work that your students do and the quality of that work and the innovativeness of that work is certainly not something that you could take full credit for, but it does reflect on the way you've been able to encourage and stimulate your students. And your own reflections of yourself as a teacher and your teaching philosophy and so forth. And so in essence, when we talk about the scholarship of teaching, we're really talking about teaching that's really inspired. So I want to just share one other thought, and then I'll open it up again to questions or comments, and that is to point out a distinction between the scholarship of teaching and learning and scholarly teaching, and there are some readings on your reference list about this. Essentially, scholarly teaching is when we engage in evidence-based teaching practices so that we are able to say, I am structuring my course in this kind of a way because the evidence tells me that's the best way to do it for this type of learner. Now, the truth of the matter is we don't have nearly the kind of research to give us that kind of evidence, and we need to develop it. That's part of developing the science. But we also have to keep in mind that there is this kind of great research going on outside of nursing, whether that's in people whose discipline is education or neuroscience, where they're learning about how the brain works and how people learn and how you stack information. And in other disciplines, there are, surprisingly to me, a number of journals about research and innovation in medical teaching, mathematics, and we can learn from all of that as helping us have an evidence base to our practice as teachers. So we go to the literature to guide our teaching. We don't only go to the faculty member in the next office who has the grayest hair to say, what do I do? How do I do this? Or we don't just automatically say, well, this is the way the person who taught the course before me did it. I guess this is the way it has to be. So we are basing our teaching practices on what we are learning from the scholarly work of others and what's published in the literature or presented at conferences. And through that, we're going to be helping to identify gaps and, well, we don't have any evidence that tells us about this. We may have anecdotal reports, which is some very low level of evidence, but quality levels of evidence we really need to develop. So scholarly teaching really acknowledges that teaching isn't just transmitting what I know to the student, and it's not just evaluating whether students can retain these bits and pieces of information that I test through a multiple choice test, but teaching really is a scholarly endeavor that does require some evidence base, and the difference is that scholarly teaching can go on inside your classroom kind of with only you knowing it, but when you bring it outside and you make it public, then you are moving more into the scholarship of teaching and learning. So let me stop there and see if there are any questions.
Okay, I'll scan first for some questions, but then I'm thinking maybe we could have some of the scholars share with all of us, and with Terry in particular, some of the examples of the scholarly teaching that you've been doing. I know many of you have had opportunity to do the scholarship of teaching, and Terry, we also work with the National League for Nursing educator competencies.
Super.
And one of the competencies, of course, is, scholarly teaching and scholarship of teaching. So I'll take questions first, but I'd love to see a couple of hands raised to share some examples of what you've been doing to meet that competency, or just in general, because I know quite a few of them. We've seen some of them as posters. So to raise your hand, and then I'll call on you. You can unmute your line.
Don't be shy, remember. Scholarship involves making your thinking public and opening yourself up to scrutiny by peers.
Yeah. Okay. Well, Donna's going to be brave. So, Donna, unmute your line, *6, and when we hear your voice, we'll have you go. Go ahead, Donna. *6 to unmute. Donna?
Donna doesn't even look like she has a telephone by her.
No, she doesn't. So I don't know. Okay. Hello? Well, while we're waiting on Donna, I also see Amelia's hand. So, Amelia, do you want to speak with us? *6 to unmute.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Hi. Thank you so much. I'm really enjoying this, and I'm glad I have an opportunity to participate in this. I'm just, having a moment of recognizing a lot of the things I've done before I even started my PhD program as feeding into what you're speaking about. But I didn't know really that it was actually scholarly teaching. So now that I have this knowledge, now, though one of the problems I identify is that I haven't been able to put this down in any manuscript or publish them. But I think I'm having a moment of realization right now that I need to really focus on, writing about things that I have done that really I'm discovering that they really were scholarly teaching at the time, because I did a lot of global health. So curriculum development with country stakeholders and teaching, taking technical advisement for a lot of development in nursing education and in-service training. So I didn't know what I was doing at the time, but now I know.
Okay. Well, I would encourage you to write about those kinds of experiences and reflect on them as you're writing. And perhaps before you submit manuscripts, ask colleagues to read it and ask them, what does this say to you? Does this have any meaning to you? What if it doesn't really resonate? What might make it more meaningful to you? And then go ahead with that kind of submission. And the other thing I would encourage you then, Amelia, think back to what we said about how a science develops, and it develops deliberately. So, be more deliberate rather than kind of being surprised of, I guess this is what I'm doing. Be deliberate in, indeed, I have a responsibility to engage in the scholarship of teaching, and this is how I am going to go about doing it, and then do it. And you know what? There may be rejection along the way. You may get feedback from editors that says, you have to clean this up a bit, or no thanks at this point in time. But that doesn't mean your ideas and your work is not important. It may just be just at that point in time that doesn't resonate, or maybe you need to recraft it in a way that has appeal to a broader audience or something. So I would encourage you certainly to continue to do that. That's terrific, and good luck, because we're more and more we're having. My area of research has had to do with cognitive intellectual development, and one of the things that was found through that research is that students who have experiences in cultures outside their own advance more readily in their cognitive intellectual development and are able to deal with a variety of points of view, and they're not so black and white in their thinking. So framing international experiences in the idea of this is not only a great cultural experience for students, but it can help them in terms of their intellectual development and how they are able to deal with different points of view and uncertain situations. So, think broadly about it. So that's great. Good luck.
Thank you.
Thanks, Amelia, for sharing, and I'll ask for a couple more examples, and then we'll move on. If anybody else has something they would like to share, we're happy to hear. Well, Terry, let's continue on and we'll stop again for some more comments and questions.
Okay. So, wait a minute. Must need to wake up a little bit here. I'm trying to, there we go.
Okay.
So what we really need is what Nancy Beekelman referred to as an inclusive science of nursing education. And there is a role for all of us, and I mean all of us, faculty, students, administrators, everybody. There is a place. And let me kind of give you some examples of that. This little cover of the booklet down in the corner is edited by Kathy Schultz, and it's called Building the Science of Nursing Education, and there's some subtitle, quite frankly, that I certainly can't read and I can't remember, although I was involved in the preparation of this book. But this book really came out of the work of one of the task groups that the NLN sponsored and I happened to staff. And the group came up with a model about what do we need to have in place if we're going to build a science of nursing education. So I want to quickly walk through some of that and point out how there is some place here that every single one of us can fit. And at the very least, the fact that we come at our work as teachers with a critical mind and a questioning spirit, we should not allow ourselves to fall into the humdrum of this is the way it's done, this is the way it's done, this is the way it's done. We should always be questioning. We should be experimenting with different ways of going about doing our teaching or the way we evaluate learning. And that doesn't mean willy-nilly just throw anything up there, but again, drawing on what we are reading from the literature, what can we try doing this in our course this semester? And it may flop, but it may be quite successful. I would suggest that if you're going to try something in an experimental kind of way, have a backup plan. Because let's say, for example, you wanted to help the students learn a certain area of information about patient care, and you decided you were going to have them participate in a game to do that. And you thought you set the game up very well and you introduced it well, and it ended up not being as successful as you thought. And you're not satisfied, the students aren't satisfied. But you have to be prepared to say to the students, you know, this didn't work as I had planned, and I would appreciate your input on how it could work better, and I'm certainly going to reflect on that. But I also don't want you to go away thinking that you haven't covered the material that we hope to cover or gotten to the points of learning that you hope you would learn. So I have a summary of the material and the major points for our topic today, and I will be sure to give that to you so that you want them to, you know, not feel like, well, that was a waste of 2 hours. We didn't get anything out of that. So if you're going to experiment with something, you want to have a backup plan. Another thing that any one of us can do easily is to critique the research that's out there and share those critiques, whether that's through some kind of a meta-analysis or a challenge paper that we write questioning a study that's been published, or we talk about it with our own colleagues and we critique that research. We need people to help us build conceptual frameworks. We've got, as we worked on this book that Kathy Schultz edited, one of the things we found as we looked at the literature was everybody's using a totally different framework, and there's no way you can begin to put any of the studies together. So are there conceptual frameworks that may make a lot of sense for us in nursing education and people to help us build those? We clearly need to identify gaps in what we know. And that can come from questioning practices, looking at what we find and don't find in the literature, and identifying, you know, we need to know more about X, Y, Z. Building databases, those of us who might have an inclination towards that kind of work. Years ago, the NLN had a task group on, oh gosh, now I can't remember the name of it, but it was something about like a language in nursing education to help us identify. We didn't get very far. That group didn't do all that we hoped it would do. But what are the key concepts in nursing education? And can we come up with some common definitions so that if 3 different people are doing some projects or studies in 3 different areas, that at least there's a commonality in the terms they're using or the way they're defining those terms. And so that there's building, and then we build some databases from that. The integration or synthesis of research in terms of those scholarly meta-analyses is very much needed in our field. We've had a couple of attempts at that, and some of those are on your reading list, but that's a great way that graduate students can really contribute to our field. What is the literature saying about using case study as a teaching strategy? And how to use it, and when to use it, and how to modify it with different kinds of students, to really pull all that together, and again, not just from nursing, but from a variety of fields. And that's just one example. Identifying priorities for research, and that probably falls to something more like a national organization, but we can't have 800 people all doing their own little thing, because we're never really going to develop any one of those things in any great depth. So can we begin to identify some priorities for our scholarly work and our research and concentrate our efforts? If you think about how the progress that we've made with building the science of nursing practice, we've finally got to be very good at this. And you'll see things like, NINR will come out and say, these are the kind of proposals we're going to fund over the next 3 years. They're all going to have to do with neonates who are at risk. You've got a great project over there about treating decubitus ulcers, good for you. We're not going to fund that over the next 3 years. And somebody else has a great project of working with the homeless or whatever, and those are important areas, but we're not going to fund that because we really, really want to concentrate our efforts on these priority areas because they're priority health problems. So can we identify similar kinds of things in education? Certainly conducting scholarly concept analyses, and maybe some of you in your master's or doctoral programs have done this. What are some key concepts in nursing education? For example, the concept of use of self. What does that mean in an educational context? How does the teacher engage in use of self, and what does that look like? How does the student use self in that educational process, and what does it look like? And when are we not using self? And so doing a scholarly concept analysis on some of those concepts related to teaching and learning it could be very valuable in building the science. One of the great big things that we need work on is measures of outcomes of the educational program, because we know it's more than NCLEX and certification rates, but what is it, and how do we measure that in some kind of systematic kind of way? That's an area that really, really needs work. Engaging in that science of translation, if you will, of what research has been done and how can I apply it and test it and reaffirm it or challenge it. Certainly conducting research and engaging in that science of discovery is an important area. And then finally disseminating findings, whether that's findings of a research project or findings of an innovative teaching project that we did. So all these things have to be done if we are going to build a solid science of nursing education. And I would hope that every single one of you can see a place where you could fit, or your students could even fit, whether they're undergraduate students or graduate students. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done and a lot of ways that we can contribute. Nancy Beekelman said our science, to develop the kind of inclusive science that we need, that we really need to support and encourage the use of multiple methods, whether they are our quantitative surveys or our observations of students in the clinical setting or journals that learners keep that we analyze. All kinds of methods are important and can help us learn better. We need studies that move beyond, and this is one of the things that was pointed out in the Schultz book, that most of our studies are, this is what I did in my course in my school with my students. And that's helpful and interesting, but we need to be thinking about, let's take this intervention and try it in different kinds of sites with different kinds of students under different kinds of circumstances. And there's certainly an increasing richness to that. And then Nancy also talked about that we need approaches that are multi-paradigmatic, and I'm not going to get into any discussion of these, but when you look at a situation from a feminist perspective, you're likely to be asking certain kinds of questions. If you look at it from a critical theory kind of perspective, you're going to ask different kinds of questions, and we need all of that. So there's lots of room for whatever your passion and interest and skill is. We need all of that. So what gets in the way of building a science of nursing education, and what's going to help develop it? And this will be another area I would ask you to be thinking about that we might have some comments on. One of the things that gets in the way is our thinking. And I just love this quote by Richard Paul, who was a guru in the early days of critical thinking work. He said, the system in place in education has displayed a remarkable ability to take on the appearance of any number of reforms without changing in any substantial way. And we have not yet learned the fundamental lesson, and that lesson is this: no substantial change can occur in education without a substantial change in the thinking of educators. So it is up to us as educators to question our practices and be open and willing to try new things. And I've been in this business for a long time, and I can attest, and Diane could probably support me, that we've had any number of national reports that have been issued raising questions about what goes on in higher education and is that where we want to be. And more often than not, our very highly educated educational colleagues across the university will focus on, well, who was on that panel that did that study? How did they get selected? And they start nitpicking some aspect of how that study was done or how that report came to be created, rather than paying attention to the essence of what that report is saying and really reflecting on, maybe there are some things we should be doing differently. So we do seem to have this remarkable ability to think that we're changing, but our paradigms really stay the same. I would say that I think it's changing now, but even in the early days of online, and I know Diane certainly can speak to this better than me, that, we kind of just took what we were doing in the classroom and plunked it in an online environment and thought, wow, now we have a whole new way of doing education. Well, do we really? We really need to change our paradigm. So our thinking is one of the things that can get in the way. Our typical practices can get in the way, and these are some of the things that I suggest we need to stop doing. We need to stop focusing on the teacher and instead focus on the learner. We need to stop focusing on delivering content and emphasizing these little factoids and instead focus on broader concepts and deeper understanding. And you know what? If we don't cover every little point of content, our students are bright. They want to learn to be nurses. Can't they go and learn some of this themselves or work together to learn from it? Why do we feel the need that we have to give all this content? And we end up giving so much content that oftentimes by the time the students graduate, it's changed because the science has grown. And yet we insist on emphasizing these factoids. We have to stop rewarding student compliance. And the student who sits there passively and just takes it all in and never asks a question, or in fact, worse yet, if they do ask a question, we get real annoyed at that and say, well, we don't have time to talk about that because we've got a lot of content that we have to cover. That we have to stop that kind of thing and instead encourage and reward questioning and that spirit of inquiry. We have to stop failing to teach our students to take risks. Where and when in our curricula do we talk with students about taking a risk? And what is a risk? And why would you do that? And what do you need to be prepared with if you're going to take that risk? And what do you do when the outcome is a difficult outcome? How do you deal with that your idea isn't embraced or whatever? I don't think we spend a lot of time with our students on that, and we need to start thinking about how we can do that because we want our graduates to be people who are going to continue to move the profession forward, and that's only going to happen if they start taking risks. We cannot just say that's up to the dean or that's up to the CNO. That has to be the responsibility of every nurse, and we as teachers, therefore, have to help them learn how to do it and how to deal with the consequences of that. And for sure, we have to stop focusing on NCLEX and certification exam results as the measure of quality and success. They indeed are a measure of success, but are they really measures of quality of our programs? I wonder. We have to stop teaching the way we were taught. Now, some of you who are much younger than me might have come up through educational systems that were more student-centered and more where active learning goes on and collaborative student projects. But most of us haven't been taught that way, and largely nursing education today is not that way. It's pretty traditional. with the teacher leading the way and the students kind of following along. And we have to stop that. As uncomfortable as it might be for us, and as much as it might be a risk for us, we have to stop teaching the way we were taught. And as Nancy Dieterman says, we have to stop teaching to a healthcare system that no longer exists. And in fact, understand the complexities and how patients move through that healthcare system and the resources that are and are not available to them. We need to stop using untested curriculum designs and teaching and evaluation practices. So start looking at where is some scholarly study or analysis of what kind of curriculum designs work well. And we need to stop making assumptions about learners that aren't true. For example, we make assumptions that, they're lazy, they don't really want to study, they don't really care about this stuff. Or we make assumptions that, they could never survive if we put them into a more independent community health setting right from the beginning, or that they have to be in a critical care setting in their transition to practice course because that's what they all love and that's what they all want to do. We have to stop making those kind of assumptions. We also, I think, need to stop ignoring values development. I know that that's hard to measure. Achievement of affective domain learning objectives, but I would posit that if we spent more time on affective development and less time on factoids, I think we'd be producing graduates who came to the clinical setting with a whole different mindset and a whole different way about going about doing practice and being committed to the profession than we might be seeing. Don't limit our views of what innovation is. Stop tinkering with the curriculum around the edges, and instead we need to make paradigm shift changes. We need to stop perpetuating those sacred cows, and we also need to stop thinking that randomized controlled trials are the answer for pedagogical research, because they may not be the best way to study the complexities of learning and the educational experience. Another thing that gets in the way is what this McFarlane, who's on the reading list, talked about as research archipelagos. I just think this is such a wonderful idea and such a great visual. We've got one person studying X and another studying Y and another studying Z, and they're all out there and maybe they're doing good things, but how are we bringing together into something that's a little bit more systematic? Having some of those conceptual frameworks might help. Having some common language about variables and what they mean might help. Having multi-site studies might help. Focusing on certain research priorities and points in time might help. But these archipelagos of these isolated research activities going on may not be the answer. Instead, we would be smart, I think, to stop to look very carefully about what our colleagues in clinical have done to develop the science of nursing practice. And the Broom article really does a great job about this. We need to do what we can to lobby for more funds that support pedagogical research to help us really understand the best ways to go about facilitating learning and engaging students. And we may need to bring a new perspective to how we will craft a national agenda for nursing education research. And Pam Ironside and I had an editorial just this past January in J&E, and we talk about the need to really increase the rigor and sophistication of our studies. Again, going back to the tools that are used to measure outcomes and the whole variety of things. Maybe we need programs like the T32s so that doctoral students can get their training in pedagogical research, not just clinical kind of research. And we need to figure out ways to be supportive of faculty whose programs of research are pedagogical in nature, and have that be as valued and as well respected in tenure and promotion criteria as other kind of research might be. We also would be smart, I think, to figure out how to get the most out of our teaching. And much like was said before about writing about your experiences, excuse me, I think that's a great way to start. As you develop new approaches to teaching in the classroom or online experiences, write about them. And build that writing into the time that you set aside for preparing your classes. So as you're developing an assignment for students, write down and keep track of, this is why I'm doing it. This is what went into my thinking to decide to do it in this kind of an order. Excuse me. This is how I plan to set it up. This is the follow-up that I plan to do. And then you've got a good start there to turn something into a manuscript to submit for publication or to write an abstract for presentation. And we do a lot of projects in our schools of nursing. We take a look at our policies or our admission practices or our orientation of new faculty. Those are all things that we do as part of our job, and most often we kind of think, okay, well, that's done. We can set that aside. But those are great opportunities, again, to write about that project and what the outcome of it was and what was involved and how did that happen. And I think another thing that we need to be smart about is continually striving for excellence and stop accepting mediocrity in what we do and in what our colleagues do and in how our students perform. So the NLN's Excellence in Nursing Education model is available to you on the NLN website. And I know, I know this is hard to see, and I'm certainly not going through any details of it, but much like the idea of building a science, this one says if we're really wanting to achieve excellence in nursing education, we need, and starting in the upper right, we need faculty who know what they're doing in terms of teaching, as well as a cadre of clinicians and researchers and so forth. We need to know about our students. Who are they? Why do they come? What do they expect to get when they're here in our program? To what extent do they think they got that? What were the most significant learning experience for them? What led to the aha moments for them? How do they think they're different when they walk out of our program than when they came in? We need to look at what kind of administrative support is essential for us to move forward with building the science and moving towards excellence in education. A biggie down in the bottom center left is, the evidence base for our teaching practices and our evaluation methods. Going around the resources, what difference does it make when students do or do not have an office of study skills or when they have people available to help them with their writing? And I'm talking here about graduate students as well as undergraduate students. That there's as much of a need for those kind of services and support. What about the partnerships that we have with our clinical facilities? And when they are structured in different kinds of ways, what's the impact on student learning? And oh, by the way, what's the impact on patient care? So all of this is needed and continuing on around. And as I looked at this and I thought about it when I was reviewing the slides earlier, I thought, you know what, maybe this can be the conceptual framework for the research that we're doing. And we develop pockets of people who are interested in studying who our students are and what best facilitates their learning from the perspective of the students. And somebody else is studying how do we recognize expertise of faculty and how does that contribute to their innovative spirit and their willingness to take a risk and so forth. So maybe some of these ideas around this central planet might actually be that conceptual model, something to think about for another day. So very quickly, what might excellence in nursing education look like? And all of these are areas that could be studied or you might try some innovations. What about our curriculum? Most of the time, curricula in nursing are very rigid. You must do A, then B, then C. Well, would it really be the end of the world if a student did C and then D? Or might some students do BC and others do CD? And do we see a difference in outcomes? How responsive are we to the needs of students? If a student were to come and say, you gave this assignment in the course, and I'm really thinking about what this course is all about, and I would really like to do this kind of a project to meet the requirements for this course. How responsive are we to that? In my experience, we're likely to say, oh no, we can't have one student doing something different. But are there ways that we can be responsive to student learning needs? And if we are, does that bring us closer to excellence in nursing? And what do we learn from that? How much, can you envision a lively exchange of ideas, walking past the classroom and seeing students up and about and walking and laughing and pulling out all kinds of tools and gadgets and equipment, and really engaging in a lively exchange of ideas about whatever it is that the topic or focus is. Students and teachers learning together, that indeed our students have different interests and passions, and they come with different backgrounds, and we can learn from them just like they can learn from us. And so what does that environment look like, and how do we create that kind of environment, and what's the outcome of that? What would happen if we had open classrooms? Higher education is typically, I go into my classroom, I close the door, nobody comes in unless they're invited, or unless it's an accreditation program evaluator that I can't say no to. Same thing with our online courses. Students in the course get into it, and you might have an IT person or two who can get in if you run into trouble, and any faculty member who wants to come in has to have your permission. So we kind of have these isolated, comfortable little closed doors. Well, what if we had open classrooms? That if I were walking down a hallway and I passed by a classroom and I saw some of this lively exchange of ideas, I popped in and I sat there for 10 minutes or an hour, and I might even participate. What does that do to an environment? Do students get a message that, faculty are interested in continuing to learn, and they're interested in what their colleagues are doing, and isn't that wonderful? So we don't know what the outcomes of those kinds of things might be. What if we had suggested learning goals instead of very rigid learning objectives where a student asks a question and we say, oh no, that's not our objective for today, we can't talk about that because we have to cover all the content. Can we give students choice of textbooks? A colleague and I did that in a project we did. We were teaching an assessment course, and we ordered 6 different books for the bookstore, and we said to the students, go pick whichever one you want. You want the one with colored pictures? You want the one with definitions and case studies? You want the one that's soft cover because it's easier to carry? We don't care. They're all assessment books. And rather than saying you have to read pages 98 to 117 for tomorrow, we said our topic for tomorrow is on, the musculoskeletal system, so go find it in your book and read about it. And one of the things that happened was when the students came to class, we would be talking and somebody would say, well, my book said that you should do this. And another student would say, oh, that's not what my book said. My book said you should do that. And it gave us an opportunity to talk about, is one right and one wrong? Can they both be right? How could that be? And bring in different kinds of perspectives. So there are lots of things that I think if we think about, are we focusing on that affective domain and values development? What happens if we focus more on learning and have more of a competency-based program than a covering content and sitting in your seat for X number of hours kind of a program? When we really encourage differences, when we as teachers admit that we don't know something, and then we think out loud so that students can see our thinking, and they can see that scholarly dimension and that inquisitiveness. What happens when our cadre of faculty really see themselves as educators who happen to have a clinical specialty in contrast to clinicians who happen to be teaching? And there's a difference in those perspectives. It may be something you might want to reflect on for yourself, but what's the constellation of our faculty? And how do we challenge students to meet high expectations and not underestimate what they can do? Certainly excellence, if we had ongoing research, that if that evidence-based and scholarly teaching is the norm, that our rewards match what it is we're trying to do, we encourage innovation, and that we're openly challenging some assumptions that we make about teaching and learning. So I have just a few kind of quotes by way of conclusion, but I think this is another good point to open up for questions, comments, arguments, reflection.
Great. Well, Terry, you've given us a lot to think about. So let's open it here for some comments and thoughts. And again, raise your hand first so we can call on you one at a time, and *6 to unmute your phone. So what are you thinking about at this particular point in time? Comments or questions? Well, Terry, hopefully we're getting some questions formulated. Mary Ann McDermott. And I bet you know Mary Ann. Go ahead, Mary Ann, *6. Are you on?
Yes, I absolutely know Terry Valiga from way back. My very first job as a master's prepared teacher was at Seton Hall, and Terry came. And it's just been wonderful knowing her and learning from her all through this, and tracking her path through many places. And I was so pleased that you were doing this. What I was thinking about was, and I thought about it, I guess, but in a different perspective. You said, like international experiences, could change what it was. Your perspective on teaching was
intellectual development.
Right, the intellectual development. Right. And I'm thinking that I have traveled to foreign countries, and I've, seen different things, but I'm thinking of something even closer to home. And when I say this, I want to say ahead of time, this is not negating the value of where my education was, because I treasure it. But I had been to Catholic school for grammar school, for high school, for a diploma school, and then went to a Catholic college for a baccalaureate. And so I really didn't know any other culture, actually, but that. And then I went to NYU, and I remember looking around and thinking, this is how, and the way I phrase it is a little childish, but that is how I felt. And this is how the big people do it. You don't have to, it's okay to have an idea on your own. The rules are the rules, and the standards are the standards. But there are many pathways to get there, and I think I was absolutely prepared beyond, I think, any other way that could have happened in my life. And as much as I like structures, all that Catholic school was wonderful for me. But in the master's and doctoral program, I was ready to hear and to work at that. So, and then going and teaching at Seton Hall for a while, which was a wonderful experience, getting fired because I didn't have a doctorate, living with that rejection, and then eventually going to Hunter. And then after retiring from there, I'm back at Seton Hall, and there's a tremendous difference in the environment in, say, a city school, which Hunter was part of City University. It's union-driven, it's all those things, but in some ways there was more freedom. And that so anyhow, I just wanted to throw that out. It's not just the international. It could be.
That's right. You're absolutely right, and thank you for raising that, Mary Ann. The NLN, for those of you who may not be familiar, has developed hallmarks of excellence in nursing education. And if you've not seen them or spent some time musing over them, I would encourage you to do that, because they really put out some wonderful things to think about. And in fact, I think there's now a toolkit on their website, and one of the books that I co-wrote with Marcia Adams is on achieving excellence in nursing education, and we kind of talk about all those hallmarks. But one of the hallmarks of excellence that they have there in the curriculum section is that students should have an experience in a culture that is different from their own. And that was purposefully stated that broadly, because you're absolutely right. It could be the neighborhood across the street. or in the town next door, or if you've been in an urban area most of your life, something in a more rural area. So it does not have to be in a whole different country. But if it's a culture that's different from your own, that experience opens you up to new ways to think about things, reflections on your own values. Are these values that I have just because I have never been exposed to anything else? Or is this what I really, truly believe? And is this what really, truly guides who I am and how I work and how I interact with others? So that notion of experiences in some kind of a culture other than the one that you know for sure. And you know what? That can also happen to some extent virtually or even through books. I mean, some of you may be familiar with books like The Spirit Catches You When You Fall Down, which is a story about a family, a Hmong family, whose young daughter has epilepsy, and their interpretation is the spirit catches her every now and then, and she shakes and she falls down. And they go for health care interventions, but what the healthcare providers are telling them to do does not fit with their culture and their understanding. So even just by reading a book like that, if you pay attention to it and read it from the perspective of putting yourself in the shoes of somebody else and trying to understand what their life might be like, at least in some little bit, it exposes you to different things. So thank you, Marianne, for bringing that up. I think you're absolutely right.
And thank you for this wonderful presentation. I'm going to mute myself again.
Okay.
Thank you.
Marianne.
Okay.
I think Robert Scolavino has a question or comment for you, Terry. So, Bob, go ahead and unmute your line. And, Terry, Robert is a doctoral student at Rutgers.
Oh, terrific.
And he's been doing some interesting work in simulations. And so go ahead, Bob.
Hi, Bob.
Hi, how are you? My question is basically centered on, it's geared towards us that we're going to be new faculty, which is a great thing. In your opinion, what's the easiest or best way to get some of our faculty that have kind of been doing it the same way for a long time to sort of change towards some of these new methods?
That's a good question because that clearly is a challenge. I don't know, that might be a good thing to study. So I don't know of what the best way might be, but a couple of things come to my mind. One is, if you think back, we said one of the things that a scholar needs is patience. And so I think one way to do that is to just keep, dropping an idea or sharing. One of the things, I have an official job here as the director of the Institute for Educational Excellence, but we're in a research-intensive environment, and not everybody is as excited and enamored of education stuff as I am. But one of the things that I do is whenever I'm at any kind of meeting, I tell you, I take any opportunity that it comes up or that I can create to say something about how we should be thinking about how we do our teaching. I subscribe to, or the school does, and I get to read it that way, the Chronicle of Higher Ed, Inside Higher Education, Tomorrow's Professor Listserv, all of those things that come with short little snippets and updates. And whenever there's anything that is kind of along those lines of, we really need to look at how we value teaching in our environment, or we really need more active engagement of learners, I'll just forward it to all the faculty and say, here's something I thought you might be interested in. That's it, so leave articles laying around. The other thing, though, I would say is to find people who are on the same page as you are and form yourselves into some kind of a little support group or somebody to bounce ideas off, and go ahead and do your thing and document the outcomes. If anybody's looking at your course and teacher evaluations, they're going to see what the students are saying about what went on in your course. You might offer to share that. One of the things that never happened in any schools that I've been in, but in some other schools, They take like 10 or 15 minutes at every faculty meeting where they invite faculty to share. Is anybody doing anything really exciting and different in their courses? Tell us about it and how's it going. So it's a natural part of the agenda for a faculty meeting. So there, I think, are some ways to do that. I would say one thing, though, if you're going to try something different, first of all, I would say be good about having some foundation for what you're going to do. Again, go to the literature or whatever. And then I think it's not a bad strategy to talk to your course coordinator or your department chair or your dean, however you're structured, in advance to say, I know this is different from the way things have been typically done, but because of what this, and this research and article is saying, I'm going to try this approach, and here's how I'm thinking of structuring it. So I just want you to know that in advance, that I've really thought it through very well. We don't know how the students might receive it, but I want you to know that I'm trying this, and it's not just something that I pulled out of the air. So that if the students do say something about some craziness, they're not surprised by it. They don't come running to you saying, what kind of crazy things are you doing with the students? And I think politically that might be a smart thing to do.
Great suggestions, Terry. I'm going to jump in here. We have about 4 minutes left. Elisa Mobley has a question. We'll do a quick last question from Elisa. She's a doctoral student too. So Elisa, come on and unmute yourself and talk to us. And then Terry, maybe we can allow the last 3 minutes to wrap up here with your concluding slide. So that sounds okay.
Indeed. Hi, Elisa.
Yeah, are you there?
Yes.
Okay.
My comment has to do with what you were talking about earlier in terms of lifelong learning. I think when we teach to the factoids, I think we make the mistake of not teaching our students to be lifelong learners. It's more appropriate to be teaching them how to look things up, how to learn on their own, so that more of that class time can be used for focusing on the affective domain and on their reflection. My second comment.
Amen to that. Yes. Go ahead.
My second comment had to do with what Bob Scolavino asked about getting other faculty on board for making changes. And you very nicely put it into politically correct terms that we kind of need administration to be on board in order for us to be effective change agents.
Right. Yes.
I'm hearing a topic for another collaborative learning community next year about academic change and infusion of innovations into the curriculum. We'll hold those two thoughts and probably put them back on the table.
Right.
So, thank you.
Lisa, thank you. And I would say on your first comment, when you think about it, we have precious little time with students in the classroom or in the online environment. And I think we waste it when we use it to give information that students can get elsewhere. Instead, I think we should be using it to help students process and make meaning of that information. And, what does it mean to a nurse in practice and so forth? Because they can't get that on a website or from a book. And that's where we should be engaging our expertise with them. And on the second point, going back to what Bob had said, I think one other thing to keep in mind is you're never going to convince everybody, so don't expect that everybody's going to jump on this train and, feel as passionately about it as you do. If you get a few people or a handful of people who are committed to some innovation and trying, then that's a good place to start. And I think more and more will come on board because they will hear from students about how excited they are about what they're doing and what they're learning. And it's kind of hard to not be responsive to that. So thank you all for your comments and questions. And I'll just, Diane, are you okay to wrap up?
Yeah, go ahead and push the slides all the way through to the end for me.
Okay, just a few quotes to kind of bring things to closure. I guess it goes to sleep for a while.
Okay.
I read some article many years ago that talked about the velvet rut of routine, and that brings such a wonderful, warm, cozy vision to my mind. And it's very comfortable to continue to do what we've been doing and do things the way our teachers did them with us. But we have to be careful if indeed we are scholarly and if we are going to be contributing to the development of a science of nursing education, we have to get out of that velvet rut of routine and be willing to take those risks. I would also, remind you of the words of civil rights pioneer Ruby Bridges, who said, "Don't follow the path. Go instead where there is no path and begin a trail. And when you start a new trail equipped with that courage, strength, and conviction, the only thing that can stop you is you." And I think this has to do with the question that was raised about, how do you get your colleagues to come on board? Start that new trail. And then finally, always keep in mind good old Benjamin Franklin, who said, "I haven't failed. I found 10,000 ways that won't work." So if that game that you tried to use in the class didn't really work well, don't consider it a failure and throw gaming out forever and ever, but think about, okay, well, the way I did it didn't work. Maybe this is the wrong group of students or the wrong course to do this in, or maybe I didn't set it up correctly or whatever. So reflect on when things maybe don't go so well, but don't say it's a failure, I'm never going to try anything different again, and just write it off. Continue with that persistence. So I thank you. I wish all of you the very best in completing your programs very soon or eventually. And with the kind of support you've gotten through this initiative, I just think we're going to look to you as the real leaders in our education field as we go forward and folks like Diane and I retire, right? Thank you.
That's what we're hoping for. Thanks, Terry. Can you give me the next couple of slides here? And I want to thank Terry again. This has just exceeded expectations, and I'm so pleased that everybody could have a chance to hear you, Terry.
Thank you.
You've been such a leader and a change agent in our field, and we want to inspire the next generation for sure. And Tanya Scott and Kevin from the WebEx company have been our background support, and we can't do this program without them, so thank you to both of them. And then one more slide, I think, I want to remind you of the next time we're going to be meeting is on April 20th, and we'll get more information out about this, but we are at the foundation, and it's going to be, basically an all-day session. Jean Giddens, who's going to come in, she's another one of our leaders, and she's going to talk about competency-based curricula, and we'll celebrate the graduation. I'll do my marketing recruitment here for posters for this session, so I'll be putting out a call soon, but I would love anybody who has not done a poster yet this year. This is an opportunity to demonstrate scholarship of teaching, so we'll look for that. And we're doing one last session today from 3 to 4, primarily geared to the master's students who are graduating, and we have 2 scholars from last year who have teaching appointments this year, and Janae and Marianne are going to talk with us about their experiences of their first employment here. So thanks, everybody, and I'll see anybody that wants to come to this next session, but particularly the master's students, and we'll see you all in April. And Terry, thanks again. This was a lot of fun.
Thanks for having me.
Okay. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.